yeah, yeah. So these aren't going anywhere. Yeah, these aren't. Yeah, like yes. Yeah, they are saved. All right, friends. I'm going to move on to our next question here. Um, so this question, again, in regards to fuel switching, how can this be meaningful in the community you're in? So how can fuel switching be meaningful in your community? Take a few moments to answer this question. There's one more, and then we're going to open it up for a few comments. Mm. All right, I'm gonna give it a few more seconds here. Don't worry if you are a verbal processor, we're coming. We're coming. If you're like me, you like verbally processing. We're gonna give you a second here in 1 minute. All righty, we're gonna keep moving here, friends. On to our final question for this section on Mentimeter. What are things that utilities should be considering in designing and or implementing these programs? What are things utilities should consider in designing and or implementing these programs? Take a few more seconds here. And while we're on this one, I do want to open it up. If you want to verbally process with us, any comments or any thoughts around any of these questions, feel free to raise your hand in the chat on the Zoom, and we will call on you just so it don't get too chaotic in here. Also, I do love chaos too. So if you just want to unmute yourself and start talking, you can do that too. Questions, comments, thoughts around fuel switching. Hmm. Hmm. I just want to echo this comment if I can. While people, maybe this will give some people give that first person, but I want to echo this right here. It says since it's so new, I hope utilities take the opportunity to try something for this upcoming triennial, even if it's a small program, so they can start somewhere and build up from there. I really love this comment because I feel like sometimes, or let me argue, a lot of times we get caught in perfectionism and we get caught in like we have to do everything right before we can roll it out. And this individual is saying, hey, like let's just like try something. It might not work, but that momentum can bring on progress, right? Progress over perfection is kind of what I'm getting from this vibe here. Anyone else have thoughts? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to verbally process with us. Shout out to this one, outreach in different languages, not just English.
Hello. Hello. I saw something about contractors.
So maybe?
Yeah. But I'm just wondering thoughts people have about getting more contractors to do this type of work. I've noticed and heard about hesitancy about heat pumps. And I personally had a hard time getting contractors to install heat pumps. Any thoughts or ideas on how to resolve that?
Recording is recording.
Yeah, does anyone from commerce maybe? Maybe commerce, utilities? I don't really know what lane, who, yeah, I see Ashley, your hand is up.
Yeah,
Are you answering the question? I mean, I'm sorry, not,
Audrey.
yeah, Audrey, sorry, not. Are you answering the question, Audrey?
Answer it entirely, of course, but I can speak to it a little bit.
Go ahead.
I think, Sophia, you may be aware of the Air Source Heat Pump Collaborative. So CEE leads that, and it's a partnership of several different utilities. And the goal is to try to help contractors, learn installation techniques, train, and also just become familiar with heat pump technology. But there's certainly additional need. There's also currently a bill at the Minnesota legislature in both the Senate and the House to provide potentially some additional training and support funding to contractors for heat pump installation. So I think it's definitely a known issue. Not that any of those efforts are sufficient, but there's efforts underway.
Thank you so much, Audrey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that context. I also want to uplift that Joel just put a link in the Zoom chat, friends. And it looks like it is around preferred contractors and really supporting contractors in this work. Like, where's procurement at? Like I feel like this is a procurement question. I don't know if they're here, but I know procurement and contractors are always a conversation. Awesome. Laura said there are contractors, incubators, and networks forming in other Midwest states such as Illinois and Michigan, including training and education around heat pumps and electrification work. I believe Elevate Energy is playing a key role there. Awesome. So maybe we got some benchmarking to do. We know it's happening in other places. How can we make it happen here in Minnesota? Alrighty, friends. Thank you all for this first segment. Y'all got Mentimeter down. I'm going to move us along here because we have two more areas to go. Thank you all so much for this feedback. We got 41 answers and around this one question. I think that is good. So I'm gonna pass it back to you, Arlinda.
Thanks, Dante. Just a second while I pull up my screen again. Does my screen look okay, Dante, on your end? Okay. So our next presenter before we have Chris Nemi from Energy Futures Group present on the financial performance incentive. I'm going to have Laura Goldberg from NRDC speak a little bit before kicking it off to Chris Nemi.
Thanks, Arlinda. Yeah, hi all. As Arlinda said, Laura Goldberg, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I work across the Midwest and in Minnesota with our Minnesota Energy Efficiency for All partners, and including the former Minnesota Multifamily Affordable Housing Energy Network. I just wanted to give a little framing and context financial or performance incentive presentation from Chris Nemi with Energy Futures Group that consults with NRDC and other partners in the Midwest. So just to name, and this might have been framed in some of the previous workshops, but back in 2019, Commerce, as well as some of the Energy Efficiency for All partners, started having conversations around a potential financial performance incentive around low-income CIP programs or energy efficiency programs that serve under-resourced communities. The state of Minnesota has had a requirement of a minimum low-income spending percentage for a long time that the ECO Act ended up increasing, but that requirement is just around minimum spending. And Chris will get into some details here, but what a financial or performance incentive can do is provide other incentives or other requirements on hitting additional metrics around efficiency. So if you have one around low-income energy efficiency programs, there's a few ways that you can structure that. And in 2020, there was a docket at Commerce, and I'll put in the chat a blog from Fresh Energy on this topic at the time from former Fresh Energy staffer, Ben Passer, which has some more details on why and what was kind of going on in that docket. But that was around existing financial performance incentives. There were some recommendations from advocates to have one focused on the low-income CIP programs in order to incentivize deeper energy efficiency savings and measures. And so, you have these spending requirements, but in order to ensure those dollars are going deep, really making meaningful changes in people's lives, advocates as well as Commerce were on the same page that potentially there could be some other metrics to help incentivize that deeper work. With the passage of the ECO Act in 2021, some of those conversations got paused, but now we're coming back to these to ensure that the next round of CIP triennial programs could include some of these potential additional incentives. So that brings us to where we are today in these workshops, which have a few different priorities, but this performance incentive is one that everyone here and others can help dictate what goes into a potential low-income financial performance incentive metric. And if you still don't know what a financial performance incentive is, Chris will explain that in more detail, including what other states are doing. So Chris, I will pass it to you.
Great, thanks. I'm really glad to be here. As Laura noted, I've done a lot of work for NRDC and other advocacy organizations across several Midwestern states, particularly Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and a little bit in Minnesota. I was working with Laura and with Ben at Fresh Energy and Annika when she was at the National Housing Trust around this issue of performance incentives for or financial incentives for utilities for good performance on low-income efficiency programs. So glad to be able to talk a little bit about this. This presentation is going to be relatively short. It's intended to kind of tee up the kind of some of the big picture things to think about in the context of performance incentives for utility efficiency programs, particularly with respect to low income. But there's a lot more detail to dive into, which hopefully the conversation will get to and future conversations will get to as well. You can move forward, Arlinda, a couple slides. You can skip that one. So big picture, why do we have these things in so many states where utilities can earn, their shareholders can earn financial rewards for performance on their efficiency programs? Well, at a very high level, they exist because there's a desire in a sense that if we give an incentive to the utilities, that their performance in delivering efficiency programs and services and savings will get better. There's lots of anecdotal evidence to suggest that works. There's some kind of analytical, empirical evidence to suggest it works as well. I did a study, wrote a paper on kind of comparing a couple of different gas companies in Ontario 20 years ago, one that had incentives and one that did not, and you could see a noticeable difference between the two. And one of the keys is that the size of the performance incentive, the amount of money you have to pay for the utility shareholder, should be kind of outweighed or swamped by the improvement in their performance and the benefits to ratepayers that accrue from that improved performance. Another important thing to think about why we have these incentives is that they can be used to encourage a focus on policy objectives for efficiency programs. And I've provided a kind of just a partial list of common examples of the types of policy objectives that different performance metrics for which the utilities can earn money for their shareholders if they achieve or exceed them. So different kinds of metrics that are used in different places. Total first year savings, lifetime savings, or other measures of the longevity of savings, the economic value of the savings that are produced. I believe that's the principal focus, if not sole focus, in Minnesota these days, although someone can correct me. The magnitude of emission reductions, whether you're reducing low-income energy burdens or some indicators of that. Those kinds of policy goals can be, you can heighten the utilities' focus on achieving them if you attach dollars to them. I mean, that's, follow the money, right? Okay, next slide. Linda, you can move forward one. There you go. So there are a mixture of things to think about if you're designing a set of performance for financial incentives for utility efficiency programs. This is just a partial list, but trying to hit on the big ones. The first one is size. what's the maximum amount of money that the utility should be able to earn from a really good performance on their programs. The second is, what performance metrics do we want to choose? Do we want to focus on? And how many of them should we have? If you have 20 of them, it's just kind of too diluted. You're not getting focused attention on things. On the other hand, if you have only one, the utilities' focus will be laser focused on that one, and you might miss some other important policy objectives. I think that's particularly important when you have policy goals that could potentially conflict with each other. If I had 3 different performance metrics, and if the utility would essentially meet all 3 of them if they've met any one of them because they're so overlapping, then there's no point in having 3. But it is important to have multiple metrics when they can pull the utilities in different directions. And as I'll talk about on the next slide, that's particularly important with respect to low-income goals. Another important aspect of this is how much money to put on each metric, and then what I call performance bands, which is, if the goal is for the utility to save, to generate 100 units of savings, do they start earning money when they hit the very first unit of savings, when they hit the 50th unit, the 75th unit, the 90th unit? Where can they start earning money, and where do they max out their earnings? I'll talk a little bit more about those in a couple of slides. Next slide, Erlinda. So why is it important? Why do we think it's important to have metrics related to performance on low-income energy efficiency programs? There's at least 3 really important reasons. One is low-income households need good performance on efficiency programs more than most customers. That's probably just obvious, but it's worth saying. Secondly, low-income households have, in many states, and I think this is true in Minnesota too, have often historically been underserved by utility-run efficiency programs. And that's true probably across the board, but it's sometimes particularly true for some subsegments of the low-income markets, like multifamily buildings, for example. And then the last one may be, well, at least as important, if not the most important reason, which is that doing a good job on low-income programs is challenging. It costs a lot of money. If you're going to comprehensively address the most important energy savings opportunities through improvements to the building shell or heat pump retrofits and the like. And if you're going to get any of those things done, you typically have to pay as a utility 100% of the cost because low-income customers can't afford it. And what that means is that if they're going to do a really good job and spend more money on low-income programs, they're taking money, at least within the context of a fixed budget, away from other things where they could get a lot more savings towards their kind of overarching savings goals. And in that sense, doing a good job on low-income programs can compete with doing a good job on other performance metrics. So if you don't have them there, you don't have those low-income metrics, there will be a tendency, generally speaking, among utilities to do the least that they have to do to kind of not get in trouble for low-income programs and to maximize their earnings by focusing on other things. Next slide. So what I've got here is just one example. It's kind of complicated, but I'll talk you through kind of a couple of key things to focus on of an existing performance metric system that's in place for DTE Electric, which is one of the two large dual fuel electric and gas utilities in Michigan, for 2022 and 2023. I should preface the discussion of this example by saying that this is the product of a settlement agreement that Laura and I were both involved in, as were a number of other advocacy groups, along with DTE and the Michigan Commission staff. So we didn't get everything we wanted if we were to do this from scratch ourselves, but there was some progress here. So the first thing to note is that DTE on the electric side has 3 performance metrics. The first one on the left is lifetime savings for their entire portfolio. So that's all of their programs. They've always had something along those lines, but what we got added several years ago, this isn't the first time low-income metrics have been, but several years ago when we started negotiating with them, we got low-income performance metrics added, and there's 2 of them here. The first one in the middle it relates to how much money they're spending on their electric low-income programs, and the second one has to do with how many major measures, and by major measures we mean weatherization measures, building envelope efficiency improvements, or heat pumps or heat pump water heaters are they installing. Now, if you look at the very bottom row, you'll see what we call the weights. So the first metric, which is around lifetime savings for all of their programs, low income and every other residential and business program, gets 80% of the money attached to it. The other 2 have 12.5% each. Now, you may ask yourself, if you were quick at math, well, that adds up to 105%. Why is it adding up to more than 100%? That was actually by design. It was part of the overarching compromise. The utilities have to do reasonably well on all 3 of these to maximize their incentive, but we agreed that they wouldn't have to get to the highest level of performance on all 3 of them in order to get 100%. They aren't, by the way, they aren't allowed to earn more than 100%. It's just that they could do a little bit less than the maximum performance on any one of these and still add up to 100. And a couple of observations about this. One is, as I noted, this is a settlement agreement. In one of my previous slides, there was a sub-bullet that said, hey, it's better to reward outcomes than it is to reward inputs to things like spending. So we would rather not have had a spending metric. We would rather have said, you don't earn anything unless you spend at least 85% of your budget or something like that. But this was a compromise, and we're gradually improving these things over time. On the last metric, major measures metric, I just wanted to observe that we used to have a metric, I think for the 2020 and 2021 plans, that was low-income lifetime savings. And we moved away from that in the last 2-year cycle in Michigan, because one of the things we discovered, and the utility itself pointed this out to us, is that when you have a light bulb that can produce 10 units of savings for $10 and has a 10-year life, and a weatherization measure that costs 100 times more, or 1,000 times more sometimes even if its life is a lot longer and its savings are bigger, it's just on a per unit of lifetime savings, light bulbs were still a heck of a lot cheaper than insulating an attic or installing a heat pump. And so by having a low income lifetime savings metric, we were creating a perverse incentive for the utilities to do a lot of the really easy, cheap stuff with as many low income customers as possible, and not getting to the more substantial measures that can provide the more meaningful savings that Laura was alluding to earlier, that will have more kind of impactful effects on their energy burdens. So this is all to say that this is a work in progress. This is complicated. You got to be really careful not to create the wrong kinds of incentives when you're creating these metrics. We've learned on the go from these and are continuing to learn. Next slide. This is the same thing for DTE on the gas side, by the way. And just a couple of small things. One is to note at the bottom that the weights are slightly different. There was relative to the electric side. On the gas side, there was less weight on the spending metric and more weight on the weatherization measures. The reason the company was a little bit more comfortable with that in this particular case is that they have a longer history of finding low-income houses or multifamily buildings that needed building envelope improvements. And it was harder. There were a lot fewer electrically heated buildings, so it was a little bit harder there. So they were a little bit more comfortable with shifting the weight here away from spending and more on the outcome metric. Next slide. You don't have to read all these numbers or these rows here. This is another example. This is from Enbridge Gas in Ontario, their performance metrics for 2023. I argued in a regulatory proceeding that they probably have too many. But I think it's worth noting a couple of things about what they have for low income, which is that 22% of their maximum incentive dollars, financial incentive dollars, are attached to their performance on low income. There's that performance is split. It's called out separately for single family and multifamily. So they definitely have an incentive to make sure that they're focusing on both types of buildings. So that's kind of a notable point. And the last thing, well, two other things. One is that their savings targets, these are all expressed in terms of lifetime savings. And well, actually, at least I believe that historically that was true. Actually, I'm not 100% sure that's true here. But in any case, there was a comfort among the low-income and environmental advocates in Ontario with focusing on total savings, whether it's first-year savings or lifetime savings, because historically, there are, on the gas side, there are far fewer kind of cheap measure options. It's just like low-flow shower heads. And their savings are kind of swamped by the savings opportunities from attic insulation and the like. And then I also think that the Enbridge Gas has a pretty good history of delivering very comprehensive low-income programs. They actually go after, they have a demonstrated history of going after everything when they get into a low-income home, so that there was a sense that that was kind of a reasonable place to go. And maybe that's the last thing I'll say about this. So I think that's my last slide as well. So maybe we'll go to Q&A.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, so we'll again do a Mentimeter that Dante will pull up, and then we'll open it up for a more Q&A or discussion.
Alrighty, friends, if you pull up your Mentimeter, I will start with the next question. So similar to the first one, is what questions do you have? If they're hearing what you heard, what questions are circling for you? Yep, if you are not seeing it, if you can go to Mentimeter, or you can click this use your phone camera to hover over that QR code like you're taking a picture, and a link will pop up. And when you click on that link, you will get to where we are. What questions do you have? Chris, can I ask you, will you answer this first one around where does incentive money come from?
Yeah, I can answer the first couple. The incentive dollars come from ratepayers, the same way the budget for an efficiency program would. And different, depending on the state, the incentive dollars are typically something on the order of 10 to 20% of the program spending, the maximum incentive the utility can earn. Incentives for cooperatives are it's an interesting question. I'm not sure how that would work in the same way that it works for IOUs, because co-ops in theory are like democratic institutions representing all of their ratepayers. They should be functioning in the best interest of their ratepayers and not needing dollars to do that, but that doesn't always happen, I know. And I believe that the incentives are, well, I think there's a statutory element in Minnesota to the nature of the financial incentives, but I think the ability to modify the performance metrics would have to sit in PUC proceedings, but Laura or others could clarify.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Alrighty, friends, we're gonna move on to our next question here, which is alrighty. So we're gonna switch it up a little bit. So we've been doing a lot of open answer. This time you get to pick one of these options. So do you think a financial incentive is a useful tool to encourage additional low-income energy efficient programming? Your options are yes, no, maybe, or I need more info. More info is needed. Well, that's good. We don't have any no's yet. Oh, spoke too soon.
Too soon.
Spoke to Jinx. Awesome. All righty, friends. I'm gonna give you a few more minutes here to vote. Give you a few more seconds here to vote. All righty. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're moving. All righty. Next one is designing a financial incentive for this purpose a priority for you? Your options are yes, it is, no, no, but it might be possible, and then no, we should be prioritizing other things. All righty, friends, and while you're answering that, I'm gonna leave this open. We're gonna give us about 6 or 7 minutes for open discussion. So anyone have any verbal comments they want to share? I'm actually really interested to hear anybody who said we should be prioritizing something else. Any thoughts on that for one of you 9 folks who said that? I'm just curious if I can ask. Or anyone for that matter, anyone can answer. I just don't want to call the 9 people out, but go ahead.
Do you mind if I'm Katie O'Rourke. I'm with Applied Energy Group, representing Minnesota Energy Resources. Thanks, Chris. So nice to see you again.
Likewise.
I just have a thought that kind of weaved our last electrification into it. That especially, and Chris brought up DTE and kind of some differences between kind of electric and gas structures. I think it's important to recognize some of these differences between utilities as we go forward in these topics. And even within in the type of utilities, the territory mix of these items too, right? And even with electrification, that I think the benefits for electric utilities is very obvious with that, right? With natural gas, I would say, I would like to point out that the ECO Act does have that natural gas IOUs. Electrification programs will go towards CIP, can count towards CIP savings, but that only applies to the financial incentive once they hit that 1% sales goal outside of electrification programs. So I just want to there's some nuances that we're kind of not discussing, and I think it's to acknowledge that in some of these discussions that we have. Which might ultimately, so that's just wanted to throw that out, especially a shareholder incentive, how we mentioned here that really kind of prioritizes definitely puts a area of focus at least on items.
And thanks so much, Katie.
Dante, I'm curious if it's possible to go back to the question slide, or if that's another prompt for people, because there were a lot of good questions in there.
Yeah, for sure. Here we go.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I can scroll down to Sue. Anjali, I see you. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, this is really great overview. I was wondering if maybe Laura Silver from Department of Commerce could share more about how this would actually come to be in Minnesota. I think the last question in particular is meant to help gauge interest, because it is something that would have to sort of be convened separately from sort of outside of Department of Commerce, as I understood it. But Laura, maybe you can provide some more insight on how it would come to be in Minnesota if people were interested.
Hi, this is Laura. We also got Anthony on the call, so maybe Anthony can go after me or correct me if I'm incorrect here, but I imagine there is currently a docket for the financial incentive. So I would imagine parties might comment in there and get a discussion going. One thing I found interesting in Chris's presentation was, it looks to me like those other states in effect have one financial incentive and have built in multiple metrics in there. I was going to ask something like, are there multiple financial incentives or just one with multiple metrics? And maybe that's all just semantics. So I was actually sort of thinking through that myself as the discussion was progressing. So
yeah, Laura, at some level, it's a distinction without a difference if you're looking at it in its totality. I think the way I usually think of it is one incentive with multiple metrics, because at least that way you could start with the most fundamental question about, well, how many total incentive dollars should be available to the utility? Because, we want to provide incentives. I should have said actually on one of the slides about one reason to have these is that this is not 20, 30 years ago was not part of the utilities like business model, and they make money on other things. And so having performance incentives enables them to make money on doing good stuff like efficiency, as well as, building new power plants and transmission lines and the like. But you don't want to pay them more than you need to. So it's a question about striking the balance. So if you have one total pot of dollars, and then we decide what policy objectives do we think are important, and to divide the dollars among those, that way you make sure that you aren't like over incenting by having 5 separate incentives that are created at 5 different periods in time, and lo and behold, they all add up to too much money.
Thanks, Chris. That makes sense. So I would say, to give a quick answer, my best answer at the moment is to look to the existing financial incentive docket and comment within there. Anthony, are you still on the call, or do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion as well. It's a little unique because the financial incentive to date has sort of just applied to overall IOU SIP portfolios. So this calling out something specifically within the low income category would be a new approach, but would likely need to follow the same sort of procedure.
Hey, thank you so much.
Can I just name, I know in one of the dockets, it was ruled that there had to be discussions on the financial incentive between advocates and commerce. But I know the ECO Act kind of slowed that, paused that, but then these workshops are sort of the next iteration of that. So I just want to be careful of confusing people to go to the docket right now and comment As my understanding is this is the first of many discussions on the CIP financial incentive that could happen with a broader group. So folks don't have to be well versed in commenting on a docket at the PUC, but that we could come to some alignment, ideas, discussion with this broader group to be inclusive. And then that goes into the docket. And I think I also have questions of then how that interfaces with the next CIP triennial plans, given that's all coming to a head very soon.
Hey, thank you,
Good.
Laura.
That's a good point, Laura. I don't think, I don't want to encourage people to randomly submit comments to that docket. So we should, conversations could continue, but once, people formulate ideas, looking to the history in that docket, the appropriate timeline for proceedings there, that would likely be the right regulatory place to start the regulatory conversation.
Thanks, Laura. And yeah, I see Anjali's comment. So, given the folks who said, yes, this sounds useful, or like, yes, I want to be involved, maybe some follow-up from this meeting can include either a subgroup or just a specific, focused part of a next workshop on this topic. So we can gain some like ideas together and then eventually go back into that docket.
100%, Laura. Alrighty. Thank y'all so much. A lot of energy around this, no pun intended. So Arlinda, let's go. We got to do pre-weatherization, and that's our last one. So hand it back to you.
Yes, so our next subtopic, like Dante said, is pre-weatherization. We're going to have Marty from Centerpoint present on their perspective, and then after that, we'll have someone else, Kendrick from Community Action and Partnership of Ramsey and Washington Counties, present from an implementer's perspective. So Marty, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Yolanda. Yeah, my name is Marty Kapsch. I am a regulatory analyst at Centerpoint Energy. I work on the CIP team, primarily support our residential and low-income programs. And today I'm going to be talking just briefly about pre-weatherization measures in Centerpoint Energy's CIP low-income program portfolio. Next slide, please. So to begin, what is pre-weatherization? ECO Act, which has already been mentioned, and again, this was landmark energy legislation signed into law here in Minnesota just a couple of years ago. It defines pre-weatherization measure as an improvement that is necessary to allow energy conservation improvements to be installed in a home. So pre-weatherization measures can help remove those barriers like health, safety, and structural barriers to energy efficiency upgrades. And some of those barriers could include asbestos, vermiculite, radon, mold, roof leaks, plumbing leaks, et cetera, et cetera. So some ways that those could be addressed. Some examples would be asbestos insulation removal, mold, moisture mitigation, et cetera. And pre-weatherization for addressing these health, safety, and structural issues is critically important, because if these issues are not addressed, then typically projects are deferred, energy efficiency work is not performed, and unfortunately, low-income households miss out on crucial energy and cost-saving measures. Next slide, please. Okay, back to ECO again. So ECO allows utilities to spend CIP dollars on pre-weatherization measures, and it also establishes some rules around pre-weatherization measures in CIP. So for example, ECO imposes a spending cap on pre-weatherization measures of 15% of a utility's total CIP low-income spending. ECO also prohibits utilities from claiming energy savings towards their energy savings goals for pre-weatherization measures. And then the statutory minimum low-income spending requirement, which I think has been mentioned by a couple of the previous speakers. Pre-weatherization spending can count towards that spending requirement. And just as a reminder, that requirement is that utilities spend at a bare minimum the equivalent of at least 1% of our gross operating revenue from our residential customers on CIP programs that directly serve our low-income customers. Next slide, please. Okay, so turning now to pre-weatherization measures in CenterPoint Energy's CIP low-income program portfolio. So in both 2021 and 2022, CenterPoint Energy filed formal program modification requests with the Minnesota Department of Commerce, and we proposed adding budget to several of our CIP dedicated low-income programs, budget for health, for addressing these health, safety, and structural issues. And the programs that we proposed adding these pre-weatherization measures to are programs that serve both low-income homeowners and renters, building owners that with 1 to 4 unit buildings that are occupied by low-income households, building owners with 5 or more dwelling unit buildings that have low-income households, and also another dedicated CIP low-income program that we manage that nonprofit affordable housing agencies participate in. So all of these, we secured regulatory approval to add pre-weatherization measures to almost all of our dedicated low-income programs. One thing to mention with our program that serves rental property owners with 5 or more unit buildings, I believe there's a stipulation that for projects that require pre-weatherization measures to move forward, that those projects do need to receive sign-off from the Department of Commerce. So those projects would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And I'm not sure if we've had any of those yet, because our low-income multifamily building efficiency program, which is the name of the program, just went into effect at the beginning of this year. So it's a brand new program. But anyway, once that pre-weatherization work is performed, then our low-income customers participating in our low-income programs can receive home energy audits, heating and water heating system upgrade, replacement, air sealing and insulation, direct install measures, and more. Next slide, please. Okay, and then finally turning to CenterPoint Energy's upcoming 2024-2026 CIP triennial plan, which it was mentioned that the IOUs are filing those plans or those proposed plans on June 1st. At this point in time, CenterPoint Energy is not planning to make any changes to pre-weatherization measures in our CIP programs, with the possible exception of modifying pre-weatherization budgets in order to meet the anticipated demand. Unfortunately, we have not finalized, but as we are looking at preliminary numbers for our 2022 pre-weatherization measure counts and spending, it is appearing that pre-weatherization measure counts and spending are probably going to fall short of our expectations for last year. Again, these numbers have not been finalized, and the final numbers will be in our CIP status report, which we're filing on May 1st. But that's kind of what we're expecting at this point. We've been looking into this, a few possible explanations for why that might have occurred. One is, even though my understanding is there were a lot of projects that were deferred because of health, safety, and structural issues that needed to be addressed, that after we added budget to our low-income programs for pre-weatherization measures, there were a lot of customers, a lot of projects that did not re-engage with our low-income programs. Some of those customers may have also tapped funding from other sources to address those pre-weatherization issues. And I also understand too, and this has been kind of a challenge industry-wide, but just labor shortages and a lack of skilled contractors to perform the work may have also been an obstacle. But anyway, I'm going to conclude there because I know we're running short of time and there's another speaker after me. So thank you all and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Marty. I'm going to hand it off now to Kendrick Paulson.
Awesome. Thank you, Arlinda, and great presentation, Marty. So yeah, you can go to the first slide here. So my name is Kendrick Paulson. I am the Assistant Director of Operations for Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington counties. We are a nonprofit that serves Ramsey, Washington, and Anoka County. You can go to the next slide, Arlinda, please. We implement the Minnesota Weatherization Assistance Program for those counties. So we all of the clients that we serve are on energy assistance. They are income qualified. And we go out and do no cost audits on their houses. And then we actually get federal funding to do all the work for them for free. So we can do mechanical system upgrades, furnaces, water heaters, that type of work, along with the insulation and air sealing. So that's kind of the unique aspect of our program. And we have our own in-house crews that go out to the clients' houses and do all this work for them, which is really great. But with that comes a variety of problems that you find in homes. So next slide here, Linda. And so we have met the road of pre-weatherization, and we used to have a lot of difficulty with this, and barriers have are starting to be removed for us, which has been super helpful. So Marty touched on this a little bit. These particular measures are from the Department of Commerce, and these are not all inclusive. So the Department of Commerce has said that they will consider additional measures on case-by-case basis. But these are a variety of things that starting last program year, that the Department of Commerce released this updated policy allowing for this type of work to be performed, and also had a pot of money that could be used for these repairs or remediations. So you see a lot of the same stuff that Marty had in his slide. We have mold, moisture, things like gutters, grading on the side of house to prevent water intrusion into the house, removing the mold directly, structural repairs, roofing repairs, so that it doesn't leak onto the insulation. One unique thing about our program is we can also do roof replacements because we can also install solar. So if they have an old roof, solar companies don't want to install it, just given the warranty of the panels. And so it allows us to be able to do roof replacements. And then there's a variety of other things, if there's plumbing issues, electrical repairs, knob and tube, panel upgrades for solar, that type of thing. And clutter, we can remove clutter from people's homes as well, because we run into that pretty frequently. So if you want to go next slide here. So I wanted to touch a little bit on how this has shaped our program and what it's allowed for us to do. Obviously, the number one benefit of pre-weatherization dollars is to reduce the number of deferrals. I wasn't able in time to get exact statistics for our department, but I think we were over about a 40% deferral rate. So, you can imagine that's a lot of homes that you go to that you're not able to serve. And with this being implemented, we are closer to 20 to 25% of homes being deferred. So it's had a huge impact for us for being able to serve clients that we previously just had to say, sorry, we can't serve your home. It doesn't make sense. If we tighten up your house and you have mold throughout your entire house, it's only going to make that problem worse. And it's only going to make it a less healthy place for you to live. And we don't want to do that, right? We're here to improve your life, improve your health. And so now we are able to tackle a lot of those barriers. Some of the other benefits are that we can work with trusted contractors. So we establish relationships, obviously standards of work. Oftentimes, when we would have to walk away, they'd say, oh, well, do you have, someone that can come out and abate this vermiculite from my house? And we just have to say, sorry, we're not allowed to provide that. And they have no idea where to even start with a project like that. So this way we have that built-in relationship that they work with us on a frequent basis and know our standards and quality. With that comes the inspections. We inspect all of the work that's performed before we issue payment. And so we know that it's done properly and done at a high level before we're paying our contractors. Obviously improving the health of a client, as I talked about mold and asbestos primarily, getting that remediated from the house is going to have significant improvements. I've gone into homes where, the 12-year-old boy slept with his pillow up against the corner and the corner had mold all over it. And he just had no idea what that was growing in his corner. And his head is sleeping inches away from it. And he has asthma problems, so what are the chances that it's tied to that? So it's those direct improvements that we can make on our clients that have a huge impact, as well as then increasing the structural longevity of the home. So if we're able to make some of these repairs, roof repairs, things like that are damaging the house, that will cause it to fail sooner, we're able to correct those issues with weatherization. But with this, there's been a lot of challenges. So writing new policy and allowing us to do expanded work is wonderful. But it doesn't always mean that it translates immediately or that we're able to now tackle every single problem that we run into. So Marty touched on, a shortage of contractors, and that is 100% true. We have very limited number of contractors that we're able to do work with, and we're seeing huge trade shortages across the industry. And so that makes it really difficult for some of these companies. Some of them have 6-month lead times, and that makes it really difficult. How are you going to properly serve this home if you have to wait 6 months for work to get started? And then difficulty onboarding contractors. We have had several contractors that have turned away from our program because we are a low income based program. There's a lot of additional paperwork that's involved versus a private job, and they just don't want to go through it. And they've said, we just don't want to fill out all this paperwork. And so some of those additional policy requirements that we have from them, both the onboarding, but then once they actually do a job, there's a lot more requirements that they have to submit for us than if they just go into someone's house. And so that can be a huge barrier that turns them away from wanting to work with us. We also run into the inability to guarantee them an adequate supply of work. So one example would be we're allowed to do crawl space excavation so that our crews could work in a crawl space that is too small to send people into. Well, I likely am only going to run into 1, maybe 2 of those houses in a year. And not a lot of contractors are going to, sign up for this program. Again, that has a lot of additional paperwork that they're only going to be getting 1, maybe 2 jobs a year. That just doesn't make sense for them to go through all that work. And so that's been a struggle for us. And then no standard process or allowable measures across funding sources. And what that pertains to, we have different funding sources. We also have different CIP dollars that we have access to. And each one has its own program requirements, right? Centerpoint has a different one from Excel from the Department of Commerce. And it can be difficult to navigate that, who will allow which upgrades to be done, and making sure that we're following all of the policies and procedures. So having some sort of standard process or having additional flexibility across funding sources would really help us to be able to manage this program a little bit easier. And I believe that was the last slide I had. So we can roll into questions if people have them.
Thanks, Kendrick and Marty. I know we only have a few minutes left, but Dante, I'll pass it up to you, how you want to go about the Q&A.
All righty, fam bam. We have a little bit of time left. I know we're over time right now. Or we're close, but let's see if we can make it happen in these last 2 minutes here. All right, we'll go kind of fast. If you have to jump off, feel free to do that, but we're gonna jump in here and try to get these last 3 questions in. All righty, so y'all know the drill by now, right? What questions do you have about pre-weatherization? But I can't say that slow. Weatherization. Okay, whatever, that word. What questions do y'all have, friends? Give y'all a few seconds here. Mm. All righty, I'm gonna just give us a few more seconds, then we're gonna move on to our next question. I'm mainly just waiting until we get to 10 answers. I don't know why 10. Oh, there we go. All righty, friends. Oh, all right, we got a few more. All righty, friends, we're gonna move on to our next question here. And this one is going to be specific to, oh, no, just kidding. It's not going to be that. So yeah, knowing what you know about pre-weatherization, are there any measures missing that should be included? Anything that we should add?
I can maybe jump in here. I think the broad range has been really good, and Commerce also said, right, this isn't limited to this list, so they are willing to consider anything on a case-by-case basis, so long as it makes sense. So I don't think there's really been an issue with the measures that are missing. I did see a question, and I don't know if we're able to go back to that. I could answer a couple of those right off the bat, because there's a lot of good ones coming in. Are we able to go back at all and see some of them?
Oh, yes, I can. Sorry about that. Yep, there you go.
What the solution is to the challenges raised. So one thing too that I didn't mention is with the different programs, there's different requirements. So Centerpoint, for example, requires pre-approval for any of their pre-weatherization measures, versus Department of Commerce gives us the allowance of, has set an average. You know, we want your average cost of your pre-weatherization money to be this. If you go over this dollar, then we would like you to just let us know, and for Commerce approval. And so that's also given us a lot of flexibility to just say, hey, if it's under this dollar amount, we can just go ahead and do it. If it's over this, we can still do it, but we need approval, just so they're aware that there's a high cost pre-weatherization measure going on, since they're trying to keep the average costs together. So having some of that flexibility within the implementer to make those decisions, knowing there's an average, but also knowing there's a limit before you need approval, really helps us as well to get some of that. And then at the top, there was another good question that I was going to address. If you could scroll just to the top. How do we build the workforce and fast? That's a great question. So workforce development has been absolutely critical, and there's money coming down with IRA for specifically workforce development. Two of the things that we've done are start an AmeriCorps program, the Home Energy Corps, to be able to get AmeriCorps members in-house, because we're also facing a shortage with energy auditors. And then we've also partnered with Center for Energy and Environment. They have a workforce development program. So we are a host site for some of their interns to be able to learn about energy auditing. And that's a BIPOC specific program to help drive awareness into that community. And so we love that we're able to participate in both of these programs and trying to get more people involved in energy efficiency and weatherization.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Kendrick, for that context. Go AmeriCorps. I'm a former AmeriCorps member. I love AmeriCorps. Awesome, friends. Laura, I see your hand up. Let me get through the last two questions real quick, and then I will make sure that I'll get you and your comment. All right, friends. So this is strictly for utilities. Anything you all have learned, and also this question around what have you been doing with your pre-weatherization dollars currently. So for utilities, what are some that you learned today around pre-weatherization, and what have you been doing with your pre-weatherization dollars? Take a few here. We also want to reiterate that if you all have to get off, we want to thank you so much for coming and give us a few more minutes of your time if you are able to. And we will be setting up follow email, and we also have our next meeting scheduled as well for April 17th. So know that we'll be back in space together then as well.
Just real quickly, while utilities are responding to the mini meter question, I just wanted to quickly respond to a question from a previous slide about can utilities claim energy savings for pre-weatherization measures? No, we cannot. Once the pre-weatherization work has been performed and thereby enabling energy efficiency projects, then you can claim the savings for those projects, but not for the pre-weatherization measures themselves.
So, thank you. All righty. I'm going to keep moving here, friends. The last one is for implementers. So this is on the flip side. What measures have you have been most impactful for you around pre-weatherization, and what are you seeing in the field?
Mhm. The measures that we've used the most have been vermiculite removal. We've also done knob and tube wiring, and then it looks like we're getting some answers too. And I know there are some implementers on here as well, so they can definitely type in. But mold moisture remediation has been really helpful, and we've also done some insulation removal, which isn't allowed in policy. So I've been able to remove insulation to then fix a problem and then go in and re-insulate the attic. That's been a case-by-case basis. What we've really struggled with have been some of the bigger ones like roofs, roof replacements. We just don't have general contractors to be able to do, as well as like crawl space issues and clutter. That can be a really complicated one because it's not only, like vermiculite's very easy. It's a health hazard. We go and we remove it. With clutter, you get into mental health issues. And so that's a much more difficult thing to get into with a client, especially, we're trying to keep our impact relatively quick so we don't disrupt their life. And a lot of people are attached to their stuff. So that's a complicated one for us. And part of the problem for us has been getting the number of contractors. So we're not able to, getting enough contractors that do the work. And so we don't have like a general contractor. And so for us to be able to do a roof or a crawl space, we don't have anyone that we contract with that's able to do that work. And so we're just not able to do it, even though it's allowed in policy. We don't physically have contractors that can do the work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kendrick. Hey, I want to thank you all. I want to throw this back over to Linda to close this up and talk about next steps real quick. So grateful for all of you all, for all the feedback and input you have given today.
Thanks, Dante. So real quick, go to the last slide for everyone. I put this in the chat. Oops. So we'll be sending out a follow-up email to share the slides and compiled responses from today, especially those Mentimeters and the chat and the comments throughout and the discussion. We do want folks to know that, reminder that we do have dates set for the next 2 meetings, 4 and 5, where utilities will be presenting on their plans. And so the first date is April 17th, 1:30 to 3 p.m. and then April 25th, 3 to 4:30 p.m. Again, that'll be included in the email follow-up too. And for any questions or comments after this meeting, please email Laura Silver with the Department of Commerce and then Anjali Baines with Fresh Energy. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for staying a couple minutes behind as well. I know, everyone has long days, so thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very thoughtful and fruitful discussion.
Yeah. I appreciate y'all. Thank y'all so much. If I can end with a quote real quick, just got love ending with quotes. I'm thinking of Margaret Mead today, who said, "Never doubt that a small, committed group of citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Hey, thank y'all for being committed to this work.
Thanks, Dante. That was awesome.
See y'all on the 17th.